Hello and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. Let's recap the week with keywords that made headlines. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit and the Group of 20 Summit took place in Peru and Brazil, respectively. President Yoon Suk-yeol made it to both of the multilateral meetings, where he called for global solidarity against deepening the Russia-North Korea military bond and sat down with the multiple leaders for talks on mutual interests. And Tuesday marked 1,000 days since Russia launched offensives against Ukraine. And the dismal anniversary came with Ukraine's use of Western-made missiles, which was met with Russia's firing of a medium-range ballistic missile at Ukraine. A UN General Assembly committee on Wednesday adopted a resolution on North Korean human rights for the 20th consecutive year. 1,000 days have passed since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine hit Russia with U.S.-made long-range missiles for the first time, just hours after Russian President Vladimir Putin updated his country's nuclear doctrine, lowering the bar for the use of nuclear weapons. Our Moon Hae-ryun starts us off.
Ukraine has fired American-made long-range missiles at Russia for the first time, just a day after outgoing U.S. President Biden gave the green light for such weapons to be used. On Tuesday, the Russian Defense Ministry stated that Kyiv used 6 ATACMS, which stands for Army Tactical Missile System, against a military facility in the Bryansk region which borders Ukraine. They claim to have intercepted 5 and damaged the 6th. Ukraine, however, said the attack was successful and struck an arms depot around 70 miles inside Russian territory. Regardless of the attack's outcome, the event is significant as it marks the first instance of Ukraine using Western-provided long-range weapons to strike Russia's mainland.
Ukraine's priority is to seize as much strategic assets and territorial assets before there will be a ceasefire negotiations taking place, in conjunction with the inauguration of the new president of the United States, Donald Trump, on January 20th next year.
Following the approval of Ukraine's use of ATACMS, Biden has also authorized anti-personnel landmines in another effort to provide aid to Kyiv, according to a report from The Washington Post on Tuesday. These mines have been described as non-persistent by a U.S. official, meaning that they self-destruct or deactivate over time, reducing their threat to civilians. The U.S. has faced increasing pressure to allow Ukraine to use long-range weapons, particularly in light of reports that North Korean troops have been deployed to Russia and are participating in the war. The shift in Washington's policy heightens its involvement in the war, despite U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's criticisms of U.S. aid and pledge to end the war quickly. This comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a new nuclear doctrine that expands the conditions under which it can use nuclear weapons. Notably, the revised doctrine states that any attack supported by a nuclear power could be considered a joint attack against Russia. It also lowers the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons to respond to attacks that pose a threat to Moscow or its allies. Russia has consistently maintained that any missile attack by a NATO member on its territory would constitute direct involvement in the conflict, and Putin's new doctrine creates a justification for a potential nuclear response. In response, Washington remarked that this latest move came as no surprise and criticized what it called irresponsible rhetoric from Russia. While Ukraine had initially been expected to attack the Kursk region where North Korean troops are reportedly deployed, experts say that this limited attack in a single location rather than Kursk could be a test to gauge Russia's reaction. With this latest attack from Kyiv, tensions are expected to escalate. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And on top of the U.S. permission to use ATACMS missiles, Ukraine also fired long-range British Storm Shadow missiles at targets within Russia for the first time on Wednesday. According to Reuters, an official speaking on the condition of anonymity confirmed that fragments of the missiles were reportedly found in the Kursk region, where North Korean troops were deployed. This is also the first time Ukraine has used such weapons against Russia, considering the UK and France have previously supplied the Storm Shadow missiles for Ukraine to use inside its own borders. Now, about these Storm Shadow missiles, they have a range of about 250 kilometers. That's slightly less than the American ATACMS. And Russia fired back immediately, despite Ukraine accusing Russia of firing an intercontinental ballistic missile. Russian President Vladimir Putin shut down the claim, saying Moscow tested a new non-nuclear ballistic missile with a medium range. Lee Seung-jae reports.
After claims by Ukraine that Russia fired an intercontinental ballistic missile at Ukraine's Dnipro region on Thursday, Russian President Vladimir Putin shot down the allegations, saying instead that it was a new non-nuclear, medium-range ballistic missile.
In combat conditions, one of the newest Russian medium-range missile systems was also tested, in this case with a ballistic missile in non-nuclear hypersonic equipment.
Putin added that the missile, named the Orchestra, was fired in response to the aggressive actions of NATO countries against Russia. He cited the Ukrainian use of U.S.-supplied ATACMS and the UK's Storm Shadow missiles against Russia. Putin also used the word test to describe the launch of the missile, saying that it was successful. Washington confirmed Putin's claims as Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh told reporters on Thursday that the missile was a new experimental type of intermediate-range ballistic missile. However, she added that the missile was based on the design of a Russian ICBM. The press secretary also said that Russia had pre-notified U.S. officials about the strike using nuclear risk reduction communication channels. Following initial reports of Russia's use of an ICBM, European Commission spokesperson Peter Stano said if confirmed, it would mark another quantitative and qualitative change in the war and a clear mark of escalation. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office said that if the use of ICBMs is true, it would be another example of Russia's escalating, reckless, and corrupt behavior. The comments came as the Ukrainian Air Force claimed that a Russian ICBM flew south of the central eastern city of Dnipro on Thursday. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The annual G20 Summit took place under a cloud of uncertainty this year. As we just saw, Russia continues its offensives against Ukraine involving North Korean forces, and U.S. President-elect Donald Trump is coming back to the Oval House. Kimjang still has more.
Under the theme, Building a Just World and a Sustainable Planet, the 19th G20 Summit in Rio de Janeiro wrapped up on Tuesday local time with leaders pledging collective action on climate change, poverty, and inequality. Global trade took center stage, with members reaffirming their commitment to a fair, open, multilateral system amid rising protectionist sentiments expected under the Donald Trump administration's second term. China's President Xi Jinping, a standout figure at the summit, advocated for stronger economic ties with developing nations, including those in the global south, and promoted unilateral trade policies, likely seeking allies amid the shifting global dynamics caused by Trump's election. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, representing President Vladimir Putin, warned that Ukraine's use of long-range ATACMS missiles against its territory marked a new phase of the Western war and vowed that Russia would respond accordingly. President Yoon Suk-yeol called for an immediate halt to military cooperation between Russia and North Korea. He emphasized the need for the international community to recognize its illicit nature and work together to end it. Brazil's President Lula pushed for a global wealth tax and successfully launched the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, but struggled to unite nations on climate funding and fossil fuel limits. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden, in his final G20 appearance before retiring, missed a key photo opportunity due to a late arrival, but ended the summit with smiles during the final session. The next G20 summit is scheduled to take place in South Africa next year. Kimjang, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol kept himself busy on the diplomatic front with a week-long trip to South America for the APEC and G20 summits. These multilateral summits brought world leaders together to discuss major global issues, but also gave President Yoon the opportunity for sideline meetings with his counterparts. To delve deeper into his trip, we have our Kim Do-yeon with us here in the studio. Welcome, Do-yeon.
Thank you for having me.
So what was the main takeaway after a week of diplomatic engagements?
Well, of course, the APEC in Peru and G20 in Brazil are two very important summits for global issues. But I do want to start with the fact that these multilateral summits happen after South Korea and other nations found out about North Korea's deployment of troops to Russia and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It was a stage for President Yoon to emphasize the importance of solidarity among like-minded nations against the illegal military cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang. It was repeated throughout his bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the two summits, but most importantly, it was also something that came up during the second trilateral meeting between the Camp David Summit members, the U.S. and Japan. Now, this happened during APEC. President Yoon, with President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, condemned the cooperation and agreed to tighten sanctions against the Kim regime. Take a listen.
The leaders of the three countries strongly condemned the deployment and participation of North Korean troops in Russia at this meeting. They agreed to share information on North Korea-Russia military cooperation and coordinate a joint response. Additionally, they decided to strengthen cooperation among the three countries further to block North Korea's attempts to acquire funds for weapons of mass destruction through illegal cyber activities.
Now, it's also important to note that the second trilateral occurred as President Joe Biden's term winds down. 15 months ago, the three leaders met at Camp David in the U.S. and decided to make this an annual event. During this year's meeting, they also announced the establishment of a trilateral secretariat to make the three-way cooperation stronger and firmer.
The Trilateral Secretariat among South Korea, the United States, and Japan will serve to review and coordinate cooperative projects in various fields, including security, economy, advanced technology, and people-to-people exchanges. In accordance with the agreement among the three countries, the position of Secretary General will rotate every 2 years in the order of South Korea, the United States, and Japan. The Secretariat will soon be established within South Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and will operate for the next 2 years.
Now, let's move on to the G20 Summit in Rio. A notable figure we have to talk about is Russia's top diplomat. How did that unfold?
That's right. President Yoon took the chance at G20 to directly address the issue at one of the main sessions. Russia's top diplomat, Sergei Lavrov, as you said, joined the multilateral summit, and in front of other leaders, Yoon condemned the military cooperation. Take a listen.
북한군의 대규모 러시아 파병으로 우크라이나 전쟁이 중대한 국면에 접어들고 있습니다. 저는 러시아와 북한이 불법적인 군사 협력을 즉각 중단할 것을 강력하게 촉구합니다.
Toyon, this was also President Yoon's first time in South America and also his official visit to a country there, the host of APEC, Peru. What was discussed there?
That's right. Another key outcome of Yoon's trip was his bilateral summit with Peruvian President Dina Boluarte. As you said, this marked his first official trip to a Latin American country. The two sides inked deals on strengthening cooperation on defense, minerals, infrastructure, and ICT as comprehensive strategic partners. Keep in mind that Peru is the only Latin American nation with which South Korea has that level of diplomatic relationship. Specifically, the two leaders welcomed a comprehensive deal on procuring ground equipment for the Peruvian army, a memorandum of understanding on joint naval vessel development, as well as an MOU to jointly produce components of Korea's indigenous fighter jet KF-21 with the Peruvian Air Force. Take a listen to what Yoon had to say.
2012년 우리의 KT-1P 기본 훈련기 20대의 수출을 시작으로 양국은 긴밀한 방산 협력 관계를 이어왔고 올해는 우리 기업이 페루 육군과 해군의 전략적 파트너로 선정되어 핵심 사업을 함께 추진해 나가기로 했습니다.
This is set to pave the way for more markets in the region, according to the top office.
Now, let's turn to the multilateral summits themselves. Now, what were President Yoon's messages at those events?
Right, so APEC, as we know, is the biggest regional economic cooperation with its 21 members totaling 61% of the world's GDP. President Yoon emphasized the importance of a free and stable trade and investment environment and proposed cooperative measures to reduce disparities among different social groups and promote shared benefits. It's important to note that South Korea is the chair and the host of next year's APEC Summit. It will be held in Gyeongju City in Gyeongsangbuk-do Province. President Yoon was handed the chairmanship along with South Korea's chair of the Chamber of Commerce, Choi Tae-won, who becomes APEC's Business Advisory Council chair. Now, turning to the G20, President Yoon spoke about helping fight global hunger and supporting developing nations. Specifically, he pledged $10 million to battle hunger in Africa and an increase of global food aid by 50,000 tons next year, among other efforts. Yoon also announced South Korea's intent to increase contributions to the International Development Association by 45% compared to 2021. During Session 3, he also pledged to help nations turn to clean energy sources and said South Korea will be a green ladder to help developing nations that are vulnerable to climate change.
All right, Doyeon, thank you for that comprehensive report today.
Thank you.
This Wednesday, a committee under the United Nations passed a resolution on the human rights issue in North Korea. This was the 20th year in a row for the committee to do so. It was adopted by consensus by 61 countries, including South Korea, at a meeting in New York on Wednesday local time. This year's resolution expressed concerns about the possible negative impact the human rights situation could have on separate families, noting that North Korea announced earlier in January that it would no longer pursue reunification with the South. The paper also urged the North to ensure the right to freedom of thought and religion and the right to freedom of opinion and expression by reforming all practices and laws that suppress these rights. South Korea's Foreign Ministry said in a statement that it welcomes the committee's adoption of the resolution and said it hopes discussions on the human rights situation in North Korea will continue to take place actively at the UN. Judges at the International Criminal Court this week issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, along with the country's former defense minister and the military commander of Hamas, on charges of war crimes against humanity during the Gaza war. Our Shin Ha-young tells us more.
The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. The ICC announced on Thursday that the warrants were issued for crimes against humanity and war crimes committed during the conflict in Gaza, where the Hamas-run health authorities say 44,000 people have been killed. A warrant was also issued for Mohammed Dev, the military commander of Hamas, who Israel says was killed in an airstrike in Gaza in July on charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity related to the October 7 attacks on Israel, which resulted in almost 1,200 deaths. This comes 6 months after the ICC chief prosecutor Karim Khan first sought the warrants. Netanyahu slammed the court's decision.
This is moral bankruptcy. It violates the natural right of democracies to defend themselves against murderous terrorism.
The Prime Minister's office also dismissed the warrants as absurd, stating that Israel will not yield to pressure until all its war objectives are achieved. The White House said the U.S. rejected the ICC decision.
We fundamentally reject the court's decision to issue arrest warrants for senior Israel officials. We remain deeply concerned by the prosecutor's rush to seek arrest warrants and the troubling process errors that led to this decision.
In theory, those accused could face arrest if they travel to one of the ICC's 124 member states, which does not include the U.S. According to the BBC, Italy and the Netherlands responded to the ruling, saying they would arrest any of the men on their territory. However, the court does not have its own police force to carry out arrests and relies on its member states for that, with limited diplomatic means to compel them if they refuse. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
The International Monetary Fund believes South Korea's economy will only expand by 2% next year due to weak demand at home. Now, the figure is down by 0.2 percentage points from an earlier IMF projection. The IMF says the country needs stronger economic policies amid downside risks and greater efforts to deal with the shrinking workforce amid Korea's aging population. But the global agency noted South Korea's economy will be able to make the 2.2% growth this year on the back of strong chip exports. There's one side dish that makes it to dinner table nearly every night for people here in Korea, and that's kimchi. And celebrating Kimchi Day this Friday, our An Sung-jin went out to learn about how to make it, which is perfect timing considering all the nutritions that kimchi has to offer, and it's a kimchi making season, better known as Kimjang.
Kimchi, a traditional Korean side dish made from fermented vegetables, mostly Napa cabbage or radish. It's a staple for Koreans and often seen as a representative food of the country. But now, more and more foreigners come to enjoy the unique Korean dish.
This Kimchi Academy in Seoul offers the opportunity to experience making the entire process of kimchi, from preparing the ingredients and mixing it into the final product.
When we travel, we like to do some cooking classes because cooking is just such a cool reflection of culture in a particular area. And it's hard to think of something that's more Korean than kimchi.
And learning how to make handmade kimchi was really a very eye-opening experience. Yeah.
The instructor said she's very proud to see foreigners come enjoy the value of the traditional dish.
Before the pandemic, a lot of visitors from Asia came to make kimchi. But after COVID-19 and with the spread of Korean culture, more visitors from around the world have come and shown interest.
It's a dish on the table almost every day for Koreans, but what's the significance behind consuming it?
For a lot of people these days, it's difficult to consume food with vegetables in it. But one way to obtain minerals and vitamins is through kimchi. Because it is composed of so many ingredients, it contains probiotics, anti-cancer bacteria, and antioxidants.
Kimchi pleases palates and is full of nutrients, but the process of making kimchi is what makes it even more Korean.
Food has become a big part of understanding Korean culture. Kimchi is not just a dish, it is a dish that bonds people together and unites them and solidifies communities. And it's probably the most important dish for the Korean nation.
This vegetable-based dish is the essence in fostering Korean culture, not only for those Koreans living abroad, but also for those who are getting to know about Korea. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
South Korean boy band Stray Kids will become the first K-pop group to perform at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London, England. The stadium is home to English Premier League club Tottenham Hotspur, a team captained by South Korean star Son Heung-min. JYP Entertainment announced on Tuesday that the concert is scheduled for July 18, 2025, as a part of the group's Dominate World Tour. There'll be 20 concerts across Latin America, North America, and Europe. The group is currently on a tour in Asia, which includes stops in the Philippines, Macau, and Japan. And a special Korean orchestra this week shared their special sound aimed at addressing social perceptions against people with disabilities. Our Park Gon-woo was there.
A melody of inclusion that breaks down barriers. That's the Heart to Heart Orchestra, a South Korean orchestra made up of individuals with developmental disabilities. The group has already touched the hearts of many, not just domestically, but also globally. And tonight, those members perform in their home country here in Seoul. For these members, the sheets of music are more than just notes and are pages filled with their own stories. These will transform into melodies and touch every soul in the audience, just like me. The quiet of the concert hall was soon filled with the majestic sound of music. Marking its 19th annual concert on Tuesday, the orchestra performed with the goal of raising awareness for people with disabilities, with each musician a vital part of the orchestra's harmony.
I practiced 6 to 7 hours every day for 6 months. My goal is to become a soloist performing around the world.
Special guest performers including politician Kim were also on stage to collaborate with the orchestra.
Through this time of shared musical experience where we can connect and empathize with each other, I hope to share the importance of embracing diversity and creating a society where we listen, understand, and harmonize together. As a fellow artist myself, I wanted to support them with my performance.
All 2,000 tickets to the event were sold, and thanks to their musical efforts, the audience was captivated by their performance.
I feel like I've seen truly perfect musicians. You wouldn't even think they have disabilities. I believe they will play a significant role in popularizing performances by musicians with disabilities.
This orchestra is aiming for even bigger goals in the future.
One is to help each and every member of the orchestra stand on their own feet as a professional musicians. The other is to hold our own position as #1 orchestra with the highest standard of its kind in the world.
He added the orchestra will continue to broaden its horizons by performing around the world, including in Japan and European countries. 박건우, Arirang News.
That's all we have for this weekend. Thanks so much for staying with us. Have a wonderful weekend wherever you are.